Our marriage was falling apart when my husband scheduled a surprise interview with a national talk show. On live TV, he said, "She's why I almost gave up everything." I sat speechless as the host probed for dirt. The next day, the producer called me crying, "He paid us to humiliate you. Just trust me, Mir. You're gonna love this." "It's a surprise," Roland said, practically buzzing with excitement as he drove us through Charlotte traffic, his eyes sparkling like he'd just pulled off the world's most romantic gesture. "I don't like surprises," I muttered, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Especially not when I'm wearing heels and don't know where we're going." "You look amazing," he said, brushing off my concern. "This is going to be good for us. For the marriage." I glanced out the window, watching the skyline stretch against a bright blue sky. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Not yet. What happened next? A live taping of a national talk show. Roland telling millions I was the reason he almost gave up on everything. A host drilling me like I was a defendant on trial. And the next morning, a call from a crying producer, "He paid us to humiliate you." It still feels strange putting this into words. The way your life can feel like it's humming along, even if slightly off-key, and then, bam, one moment rips the curtain back and you realize how long you've been living in a lie. I met Roland Harper when I was 25. We were both volunteering at a book fair in Asheville. I was stacking copies of To Slaughter a Mockingbird and The Bridges of Madison County, and he breezed in wearing a denim jacket and that toothy grin that made women turn their heads. He had this magnetic way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Back then, I felt seen. For the first time in years, someone looked past my quiet demeanor and librarian cardigans and saw something warm. Something worth catching. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony up at Craggy Gardens. Just us, close friends, and the endless blue haze of the Blue Ridge Mountains behind us. He cried during his vows. I believed every word. For a while, we were happy. Genuinely. We had 2 kids, Milo and Ruby, raised them in a cozy craftsman house on the east side of town. I stayed at the library. Roland worked in regional sales for a growing tech firm. He traveled a lot, but we made it work. But as the years passed, things began to shift. He got more into his image, bought expensive watches, started following personal development influencers. He began referring to himself as a brand. I didn't get it, but I nodded along. We'd eat dinner and he'd be scrolling. He stopped asking about my day. When I told him I missed him, even when he was right there, he'd get defensive. "You act like I'm the villain for working hard," he'd say. "You used to be proud of me." There were whispers, nothing concrete. A friend mentioned seeing him with someone at a restaurant in Raleigh. He claimed it was a client dinner. Another time, Ruby overheard him on the phone late at night laughing, his voice soft and flirtatious. Still, I stayed. Part of me thought this was just the middle of marriage rut. That things would right themselves. We had history. Children. A mortgage. Lives that had blended so thoroughly over 2 decades, the idea of separation felt like amputating a limb. Then came the Tuesday. Roland was insistent I take the day off work. "We're going somewhere," he said with a wink. "You'll thank me." We drove 2 hours in silence, save for the occasional hum of his favorite podcast hosts, people who preached about authenticity but seemed more interested in algorithms and virality. When we pulled up to a sleek studio building with signage for Moments That Matter, a nationally syndicated daytime show, I felt my stomach turn. I asked, "What is this?" He smiled like a kid about to reveal a magic trick. "We're going on. Together. They're doing a segment on couples overcoming challenges. Our story could help people." My mouth went dry. I said I wasn't comfortable. "They already booked us," he replied. "It's happening. Just be honest." The studio felt like a trap. People with clipboards fluttered around us. A woman powdered my cheeks and brushed my hair back while someone else fussed with the mic under my sweater. No one asked me anything, not for consent, not for input. Then the lights came up, and Ivy Kroll, the host, sat across from us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Roland jumped right in. "She's why I almost gave up everything," he said. I turned to him, heart hammering. "She stopped believing in me," he continued. "We used to be partners. Now I feel like a ghost in my own home." The host leaned in. "How did that make you feel?" "Lost. Unseen. Like I was failing as a man." I tried to form words, but it felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's script. They turned to me. Asked leading questions. Did I withdraw affection? Did I question his dreams? Did I consider how I'd made him feel? I stumbled through answers, trying not to look like a monster. I said we'd grown distant, that I wanted to reconnect too. But the questions were pointed. Accusatory. By the time the segment ended, I was humiliated. Raw. On the way home, Roland grinned like he'd just pulled off a bank heist. "That was powerful," he said. "People are gonna relate." I said nothing. Just stared at the dashboard, hands curled tight in my lap. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Hallie, the producer from the show. Her voice trembled. "I know I could get fired for this," she began, "but I need to tell you the truth." She took a deep breath. "He paid us. To humiliate you." Every question Ivy asked was from him. "He worked with us for weeks. He gave us clips of your family, pictures, sound bites. Told us how to push your buttons." I felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I didn't know until it was too late. And I couldn't sleep." "I'm so sorry, Meredith." I hung up, sat in the quiet house, and cried for hours. Not because of the show, but because I'd finally seen him. Fully. The man I'd married was gone. Maybe he'd disappeared years ago and I'd been too afraid to look closely. He didn't want to fix us. He wanted a storyline. He wanted to paint himself as the broken man whose cold wife abandoned him emotionally. He needed a stage. And I was his villain. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Instead, I started gathering everything I could. Emails, bank statements, old voice messages. I spoke to Hallie again. I wanted to know exactly what he'd done behind my back. It was worse than I imagined. He didn't just pay for the segment. He pitched it. Crafted it. Pitched multiple versions until they agreed on the one with the most emotional punch. He called it a brand move. For a few days, I didn't say a word to Roland. I went about my business like everything was fine. I made coffee. I fed the cat. I even watered his precious bonsai tree by the window, the one he always said symbolized patience. Inside, I was screaming. Every time I looked at him, I saw that smug face on camera, pretending to be the wounded party while I sat there, flayed open in front of a live audience. I thought about the viewers who'd messaged me afterward, some supportive, but a lot worse. There were anonymous emails calling me a cold wife, accusing me of emasculating him. One woman even wrote, "You should be grateful he still wants to be with you." I didn't respond. Not to any of it. But I started planning. I met Hallie, quietly, off the record. We sat at a small table tucked in the back corner of an independent cafe in Charlotte. She looked pale, guilty, tired. "I can't undo what happened," she told me. "But I'll help however I can." I kept everything. Emails, production notes, even texts where he says things like, "Don't worry, she's too passive to push back." She passed me a flash drive, no ceremony, just a quiet slide across the table like we were in some indie spy movie. "I don't want money. I just want to sleep again." I thanked her and left, hands shaking. Back home, Roland was filming himself again. In the living room. Talking into his ring light, rambling about growth and overcoming adversity. He was shirtless, for some reason, like vulnerability required nudity now. When he noticed me, he gave a little laugh. Gotta keep the content flowing. Strike while the iron's hot, right? I nodded. Didn't say a word. Just kept walking. That night, I started watching the clips on the flash drive. There were segments of him on the phone with the show's segment producer, talking strategy. Push her to talk about the kids, he said in one recording. If she gets emotional, even better. Viewers eat that up. He referred to me, his wife of over 2 decades, as the narrative hook. I had to stop the playback halfway through just to breathe. It wasn't just betrayal. It was performance art at my expense. He'd used our shared history like a prop to elevate himself. After that, I began separating things. Slowly, deliberately. I opened a new bank account. Had my paychecks rerouted. Took my name off our shared streaming services. Called a lawyer in secret. I needed to get my ducks in a row before I made a move. Meanwhile, Roland kept soaking in the attention. He started doing interviews with local outlets. He posted on Instagram about surviving a loveless marriage and fighting for the family unit. The comments kept flooding in. She doesn't deserve you, King. This man deserves peace. I hope your wife wakes up and sees what she has before she loses it. It wasn't just strangers. Some of our mutual friends turned distant. A few even dropped in with concern disguised as judgment. You should really talk to him, one friend texted. He's clearly hurting. Hurting? I wanted to scream. He was performing pain. Meanwhile, I was quietly enduring the real thing. I remember one afternoon standing in the grocery store aisle, staring blankly at a shelf of pasta sauce. My hand started shaking. I felt like I was going to cry right there in front of the rigatoni. The pressure, the betrayal, the gaslighting from every angle, friends, strangers, even the media, it was suffocating. I had spent 22 years being loyal, supportive, patient. And now, somehow, I was the villain in a story I didn't even agree to be in. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when I could not only speak, but show. One day, I came across a journalist named Liana Murrow, someone I followed quietly for years. She hosted a rival show, one with fewer lights and drama, but real reporting. She was known for exposing manipulative public figures and had a background in investigative journalism. I wrote her a letter. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten. I told her everything. Not in a sensational way, but factually. Carefully. I included pieces of the evidence. A transcript. A still from the flash drive showing Roland laughing during one of the segment planning calls. I ended it with, I don't want to go on a revenge tour. I just want the truth out there. I want to feel real again. A week later, her assistant called. She wanted to meet. She flew to Asheville. Came to my house with a small team and a cameraman. They didn't even bring makeup. It wasn't that kind of show. When we filmed the interview, I didn't cry. I spoke plainly. About marriage, manipulation, emotional abuse, and what it feels like to be turned into a plot twist by someone you once trusted with your life. I kept thinking about other women watching. Wives who'd stayed quiet too long. Partners who felt erased in the background of someone else's spotlight. When the segment aired, it didn't go viral in the traditional sense. There were no flashy edits or gotcha moments. It was quiet. Measured. But it spread. People started to listen. And then, Roland's narrative began to crack. Clients backed out. His online following, once full of blind loyalty, started questioning him. He went silent for a few days. And then he showed up at the house. Unannounced. He stood on the porch with a bouquet of yellow tulips, my least favorite flower, which told me all I needed to know. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I just wanted people to understand what I was going through. You never let me explain. I looked at him for what felt like the first time in years. He looked older. smaller. Or maybe I had just finally stopped romanticizing the man I married. You wanted people to understand your version, I said. That's not the same as truth. He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. I thought it would bring us back together. You thought humiliating me publicly would fix us? He said nothing. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Then he left. I watched from the window as he stood by his car for a while, like he wasn't sure whether to leave or come back and try again. Eventually, he drove off. And I stood there, barefoot on the wooden floor of the living room we'd once filled with baby toys and birthday balloons, realizing I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt awake. After Roland left that afternoon, I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. The same living room where we'd once danced on New Year's Eve in socks, tipsy and giggling. The same place where we'd argued over things like college tuition and his obsession with replacing every normal light bulb with smart ones that barely worked. Now, it just felt like space. Not mine. Not his. Just space. A holding area between what used to be and what was coming. I knew what I had to do next. The interview with Liana had already aired, but I hadn't really been online much since. I didn't want to wade through comments. I didn't want people to pity me, or worse, turn my story into entertainment like Roland had done. But then my sister Nora called. She lives in Maine, has 2 sons, and usually avoids drama at all costs. But that day, she was practically vibrating through the phone. Mir, she said. I saw the interview. Holy hell. I sat down on the back steps, phone pressed tight to my ear. I wasn't sure if you'd even watch it. Are you kidding? I cried. I yelled. I wanted to throw my mug through the screen when they showed those emails. How did you stay quiet for so long? I don't know, I admitted. It crept up on me. One little compromise at a time. She exhaled into the phone. I always thought he was charming. I feel so stupid now. You're not stupid, I said. He is charming. That's the problem. We sat in silence for a bit. Sometimes you don't need to talk much with people who really know you. Then she said something I didn't expect. You know, Mom would have hated this. I laughed, unexpectedly. Hated him or hated the attention? Both, she said, dry as toast. But I think she'd be proud of you. It took me a long time to believe that. That doing this, exposing it all, wasn't me being petty or bitter. It was me finally standing up in my own life. Not as a reaction to him. Just, for me. After the story aired, I heard from more than a few women. Some I barely remembered. One of them was a woman I'd gone to high school with and hadn't spoken to in decades. She said, "Thank you for putting words to something I lived through but couldn't explain." I started writing back to people. Not long replies, just short messages. I see you. Thank you for reaching out. You're not alone. It felt good. Healing, even. But then came the backlash. Because of course it did. Roland posted a carefully curated response video. It was filmed in his new apartment, a sterile rental unit with a fake plant and a soft acoustic guitar loop in the background. He looked disheveled. Purposefully. He talked about cancel culture and misunderstandings. He said he was deeply hurt by the public's reaction and just wanted peace. He painted himself as the one trying to protect the family narrative. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. I still love her. I always will. But sometimes, people let their pain speak louder than the truth. That video blew up too. His followers were divided. Some defended him, others started piecing things together. But I stayed quiet. I'd said what I needed to say. I wasn't going to get pulled into a digital ping-pong match. Instead, I focused on the tangible stuff. I officially filed for divorce 2 weeks later. No more delays. I gave my lawyer everything, emails, bank statements, documentation from Hallie and the production team, even video excerpts. My lawyer, Harriet, was a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes and a calmness that could disarm a tank. She reviewed everything without much reaction, then looked at me and said, "This is going to work in your favor. He's not just manipulative, he's stupid." I blinked. "You think so?" He left a paper trail a mile long. And I'd dealt with men like this before. They build their whole persona around the illusion of control. When that illusion cracks, they scramble to spin it. They don't realize how obvious they become. I liked her instantly. The divorce process itself, though, ugh. It was brutal. Roland didn't take it well. At first, he tried to play the amicable card. "We don't need to make this ugly," he said. "We can split everything fairly." But when he realized I wasn't going to let him walk away with his narrative intact, he turned cold. Vindictive. He tried to claim the house. Said I was financially dependent and emotionally unstable. He even listed my therapy sessions as a strike against my character. Harriet shut that down fast. "Your husband went on national television and orchestrated a smear campaign against you," she said in one of our meetings. "You going to therapy is the only sane part of this story." Still, it hurt. Every filing, every letter from his lawyer, felt like another way of saying, "You don't matter. Your version doesn't count." But I kept going. I leaned on my kids, carefully. I didn't involve them in the legal stuff, but I let them in on the truth, piece by piece. Ruby, my youngest, was furious. "He did what?" she said when I told her about the paid interview. Milo, more reserved, just nodded. "That tracks," he muttered. "He's always had a weird obsession with perception." That hit me harder than I expected. Because it made me realize they knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I asked them if they were okay. Ruby said, "I'm not. But I will be." "Are you?" "I'm getting there," I told her. And I meant it. Little things started feeling different. Lighter. I no longer jumped when my phone buzzed. I started cooking again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I went to the farmer's market, bought flowers for the house. Just because. I even started journaling again. I hadn't done that in years. I wrote about small moments, my first morning coffee, the sunlight on the kitchen floor, the feeling of finally exhaling without guilt. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't revenge why. But it was mine. Meanwhile, Roland's presence started fading from the news cycle. That's how it goes. People move on. Drama only sells for so long. His followers started dropping off. A few brands issued generic, no longer affiliated statements. But he didn't stop reaching out. Texts. Emails. Even a voicemail where he said, "I just wanted to talk. We've shared so much. Doesn't that mean anything?" I didn't respond. Because it did mean something. It meant I finally understood the difference between history and home. And I wasn't going back. The last time Roland ever set foot in the house was 3 months after I filed. He came to grab a few things, boxes of tech gear, old suits, random kitchen gadgets he insisted he couldn't live without but had never once used. I stayed upstairs while he loaded up his car. I didn't want to give him the stage he was so used to performing on. As he was leaving, he shouted up the stairs, "You could have handled this differently, Meredith." I didn't respond. Because I had. I'd handled it with grace, with precision, with boundaries. He just didn't like that the script didn't end with me begging him to stay. When the divorce finalized, I celebrated quietly. No party, no cake. Just a walk around the neighborhood with a thermos of hot tea, the air crisp and clean. I felt like I had shed an old version of myself. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but like I'd finally washed off years of someone else's expectations. But the true moment, the moment that sealed the ending in a way that felt so deeply satisfying, came 6 weeks later. It started with an email. It was from a publishing house in New York. A modest imprint known for memoirs, essays, and real-life stories that centered around women reclaiming their narratives. They'd seen my interview with Liana Murrow. The email was short and kind. They weren't promising anything, but they wanted to know if I had ever considered turning my story into something more. A book. A collection. A narrative about emotional coercion, visibility, and the silent unraveling of long marriages. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I laughed. Not out of mockery. Just astonishment. I had never seen myself as someone whose story mattered in the big, commercial sense. I was a librarian, for heaven's sake. I spent more time organizing other people's voices than asserting my own. But the more I thought about it, the more the idea burned bright in my chest. I called Ruby. "You should do it," she said immediately. "Seriously, Mom. You lived it. You earned this." So I did. Over the next few months, I began writing. I started with scraps, memories, bits of journal entries, voice notes I recorded while walking. I didn't even worry about structure. I just wrote the truth. I wrote about falling in love with someone who didn't exist anymore. I wrote about motherhood, and grief, and the quiet guilt of not seeing the signs sooner. I wrote about what it's like to be humiliated publicly, and then get up the next day and make coffee anyway. Eventually, the publisher signed me on for a memoir. The book was modestly marketed. No fanfare. No flashy tour. Just a few radio interviews, a couple of podcast appearances, and one bookstore event back in Asheville. I didn't expect it to make waves. But it resonated more than I anticipated. A few months later, it hit a small bestseller list in the nonfiction category. And that's when he noticed. I knew, because he emailed me again. Subject: your book, I read it. I didn't think you had it in you. I guess I underestimated you. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he did. Just that weird, passive-aggressive mix of resentment and fascination. I didn't respond. A few days later, I got word that he'd pitched a book of his own. A rebuttal memoir. A tell-all. The publishers passed. Apparently, no one wanted a redemption arc for a man who paid a TV show to tear down his wife on camera and got caught. And here's where the revenge became quietly perfect. Not because I destroyed him. Not because I fought fire with fire. But because I stopped playing the game entirely, and succeeded anyway. He lost sponsors. His podcast listeners dropped. The motivational brand he was trying to build faded into digital dust. And I built something real. Something mine. When the book launched, I didn't use his name. Not once. I referred to him as my former husband. That was all. Because that's all he deserved. I didn't need to expose every flaw or drag him through the mud. I just told the truth. And let the truth do what it does best, linger. One afternoon, I was at Malaprop's, our little indie bookstore downtown, signing a few copies for their shelf. A woman came up to me. She looked like she was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a cardigan I swear I'd seen in my own closet. She said, "Thank you for writing it." I smiled. "I'm glad it resonated with you." She leaned in a bit closer. "I didn't leave my husband when I should have. But after I read your book, I did. And I don't regret it." That's when I knew I'd done something that mattered. Not just for me, but for someone else out there, sitting in the quiet collapse of their own life, wondering if they were allowed to want something more. The final cherry on top? A few months later, I was invited to be interviewed on a panel about emotional resilience in long-term relationships. Ivy Kroll, the talk show host from that disastrous first interview, was supposed to moderate it. She declined last minute. They brought in Liana instead. We talked. Not just about betrayal, but about recovery. Reclamation. Dignity. And afterward, when the cameras were off, Liana turned to me and said, "You're the only guest I've ever had who didn't ask for their interview to be edited." I didn't need to, I told her. I finally said what was mine to say. And that was the real revenge. Not loud. Not cruel. Just truth, presence, and peace, delivered without apology.